provides over 100,000 supporters with consumer news, action alerts, and opportunities to take action. For nearly 2 decades, Citizens for Health has been a nonprofit pioneer in the natural health freedom movement. The Citizens for Health Education Foundation offers tools to inform the public of health issues and educate and influence policymakers. Jim Turner is here to spread the word about some of the most interesting topics that can affect your world, from the dangers of mislabeled or dangerous products to the questions and concerns of vaccines. You'll want to listen to Jim as he speaks on behalf of Citizens for Health. And now, on to our show with Jim Turner and Peter Mingils. Take it away, Peter.
Hello, everyone. Peter Mingils here. You're listening to us on Building Fortunes Radio. It's www.buildingfortunesradio.com. For anybody that might be a new listener or unfamiliar with my voice, my name is Peter Mingils. And we've started to stream, which is a way for people to say, you know, we're streaming a video, we're streaming an audio, we're streaming portions of our radio shows, this one specifically, and the platform that we use gives us 30 minutes. And there's no way in the world I'm ever going to tell Jim Turner we're going to cut this down to 30 minutes because there's great information here. So what we do is when we go over a little bit, we just split them up. So you'll be able to see the last radio show that we did, we split up 3 ways. So you'll be able to find us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, LinkedIn as soon as they start to approve us for doing some stuff like that. So we're trying to really expand the word that we do over here at Building Fortunes Radio, but specifically we're doing it with Jim Turner's radio show because he's got a great amount of information. We talk about really cool topics that I think are appealing to everyone. Now, today is the day after Thanksgiving, which is kind of Thanksgiving here in the United States, which is kind of neat. So I might reference some of those things throughout the show. But the stuff that Jim Turner talks about is priceless, and it's dateless. I mean, you could listen to it 3 years ago or 3 years from now, and it would still be pertinent information. Maybe if we're talking about the election, some things have played out by then. But if we're talking about history of an industry or something like nutrition or vaccines or what happened way back when, this is like the encyclopedia of knowledge, and I really like to thank, and when we're doing Thanksgiving stuff, Jim Turner for being here as often as he can. And one of the benefits for us is the coronavirus has made it so he hasn't had to travel to see his clients as often. So we get a chance to speak to him more often than usual, which I really appreciate. So first, Jim Turner, my Thanksgiving was really great because we had some of my kids home, my granddaughter specifically, which was always really cool. And we're kind of not obeying the coronavirus mandates by the political people that do whatever, and I'll talk about some other stuff as well. But first of all, so we are here. We survived so far. Not sure what's going to happen 3 or 4 weeks from now, but the reality is we are here again on Building Fortunes Radio. How are you, and thanks for being here.
Well, I'm fine. We're here. We had our Thanksgiving here at our house where we are, a little acre northern D.C., we have a big garden, and we had my son and his girlfriend and for dessert after we had 3 of us had dinner, and we did not obey any rules. We just lived in a way that was congruent with the rules, and it worked out very well. And actually, it's quite nice. You said something I found interesting, that you said I didn't see my clients as much as I used to when we traveled more. Ironically, I actually see some of them more because I do it on Zoom, and I actually can do Zoom. I tell people about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, something like that. I had meetings with people in one day. In one day, I had meetings with people in Budapest, Amsterdam, Berlin, and Cambridge, England, all on the same day. Nothing I could have ever done by just traveling. So it's very interesting. I'm quite interested in the way this is all working out.
And probably becoming quite the techie guy too. I'm probably somewhat impressed.
Well, I don't know how techie I am. I always am able to learn whatever I need to learn to get through the day. And I've been doing that so far, and we've done well. A lot. The Zoom call thing is very, very interesting, and I think it's part of the unfolding of this whole, the human experiment is unfolding and giving us much broader reach than we had before. And I think if you remember, I mean, just think about the idea that when we were able to move from, say, St. Louis to Los Angeles or St. Louis to San Francisco, it took a long time in a Conestoga wagon, and pretty much once you were over there, you kind of stayed there. Eventually railroads got going and things got a little faster, but things were relatively slow compared to, say, the way they got to be when, say, the telegraph going and then radio. One of the principles of unfolding history that I've been watching is that when a message could move more rapidly than an actual physical person, that changed the shape of things. So if a message had to be carried by an individual from one individual to the next, things moved much more slowly than if you could send them out on a telegraph wire. And that was one of the things that changed the dynamic of the unfolding of our country and I think worldwide. Now we are in a situation where our messages are traveling way faster than the telegraph, way faster than even radio or television. You have situations now going on where people are going back and forth with dozens and dozens of people simultaneously all day long, with nothing more than a minute or two between the outreach and the feedback. This is an enormous shift in the ethos of the world we live in. Our daily world has shifted. And it's very funny because there is a way in which COVID-19 has expressed both a slow down and a speed up simultaneously. And so we're in a very interesting shift underway, and I think we're just at the beginning of that, by the way. One of the interesting things is that COVID is either the third or the fourth, depending on how you count them, of these so-called pandemics that's happened in the last decade. Three or four of the previous ones were all handled with a few hundred deaths in the United States at the most. But for various reasons, and I'm not sure how much is intrinsic to what this particular agent is, or how much is the way we responded, or how much is the vulnerability of our systems. But this one is moving very, very rapidly and outside the control of our normal control mechanism. But it is forcing us to step back and evaluate. I heard somebody say the other day that COVID-19 was nature's way of saying, was Mother Nature's way of saying, go to your room and reflect on your behavior. I thought that was a useful thought. The situation is going to continue to get more and more complex on the disease side. And we're all going to have to start thinking how we want to handle it. So I'm going to stop there for the moment. I can go back to some more introductory stuff if you want, but let me get
great information. Yeah, great information. Yeah. So I'm sorry, Jim. I'm talking over you. Go ahead, finish.
No, you go.
So for the people that are listening in, if you pick up any one of our previous radio shows, you can find out a little bit about Jim's background with Citizens for Health. I always like to give them that plug. Go to citizens.org, CITIZENS.org. Sign up for the newsletter. They have some really great action alerts. He sends out a newsletter at the appropriate times, and pretty active audience that does the things that they do on citizens.org. But the organization is Citizens for Health. Jim's been there since almost the super-duper very beginning, since 1993, and he was one of the original Ralph Nader Raiders, wrote a book called The Chemical Feast. Hey, Jim, I listen when you talk, so I got this down. I could write your next biography.
That's good.
So, but we get a chance to kind of sometimes, I'm going to use as an example where I don't know a lot of these things. Jim has spent his whole entire lifetime on stuff, and for some of the stuff, we're exposed to it for the first time. So I might be able to say something, and Jim would say, well, that's not exactly the way it works. Or he might say, well, this is how exactly this happened, like how it generated. So there's always some really great history lessons in the previous radio shows. So I love being the host because I get a chance to listen and interact with Jim, but you could do the same thing that you share with your friends as well. Lots of great stuff. So Jim, that brings me to one of the topics I have for today. I'm going to kind of bring this up as I really didn't know this. So I was doing a little bit of research. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. but I'm a vaxxer questioner. I know that makes me an anti-vaxxer based on whoever's definition you're posting, but I'm just like one of those guys that doesn't mind asking questions. So I think that's pretty smart because number one, I don't want to be manipulated. Number two, I realize my situation might be personal, and what happens for the world or the group may not be good for me. So I don't mind asking some questions. And recently, everybody's on to the vaccine, and get rid of the politics of why did they announce it all after Donald Trump is potentially losing the election? Why didn't they give him a little bit of a boost and all that sort of stuff? But whatever, that's the politics. But vaccine. So thinking about short-term studies, well, you might be able to do a short-term study in a couple of days, maybe a month. But how in the hell are you going to be able to do a long-term study? And then you might be able to do a short-term study, but how broad of a short-term study? There's a lot of things that are going on inside the human body. And I said, I think I'm going to find out a little bit about this vaccine. And when I did my first bunch of research, I might have heard it before, but it just didn't click. It said something about mRNA. I'm like, wait a minute. Vaccines is where they take like the virus and they weaken it and they inject you with it, and then it kind of, your body sees the weakened virus, and that whole vaccine story thing. You don't have time to develop it that way. You're doing a messenger, RNA. Now, I was a biology and a chemistry major in college. Not that I remember all of it, but I had somewhat been indoctrinated that RNA was somewhat important. Almost as important, or probably almost important, as DNA, but that's why we call it RNA and DNA, and I'm not really, it's been a while since I brushed up on those biology textbooks. But, Jim, I was horrified to see that, wait a minute, I got to do a little bit more research on this, and oh my gosh, you talked about human experiment a little bit earlier in our radio show. This is probably the single largest human experiment that I could ever imagine, and people are rolling up their sleeves waiting online just to get it. Now, I just said I'm just starting my investigation. I'll let you comment or correct anything that I said, add to it, but let's kick it off with this like messenger, RNA vaccine conversation, and then we'll let this conversation continue as it may.
Well, talk about being a 4-year-old with a fork in your hand and walking over to the electric socket and sticking the fork in. That's kind of what your question is.
Yeah.
The system is not prepared to have the conversation that you just opened up at the moment. And my own personal relationship with this situation goes back to 1970. It's complicated to understand that, as you pointed out, that I started out in Washington actually in 1968 working with Ralph Nader. And I studied Ralph Nader for a year in law school prior to that because of the unique way that the law professor set up the class. He picked 15 people out of the torts class. Torts is one of the primary major things you learn in your first year of law school, and it's like accidents or insults or whatever, a tort. Personal injury is a tort. So we're studying this guy. Took 15 people out of that class to engage in what he called the Auto Safety Seminar, which led to the Auto Safety Summit. And each of the 15 were assigned a role to play. One played the head of General Motors. One played Senator Magnuson, who was conducting auto safety hearings at the time, and he assigned me Ralph Nader. And our job was, for the year, we met every Monday night for a 4-hour seminar, and then we worked on stuff in between. And we were to read everything written by or about our character. One of the characters, interestingly enough, was an auto accident victim, and we had to read everything written by or about our character. We had to then prepare a written brief about our character, presenting their argument to something called the Auto Safety Summit, which was a day-long setup in the moot courtroom where they had 4 law school professors plus our teacher grade our performance as we tried to figure out the auto safety problem. That was 1967. I then spent the next 9 months trying to locate Nader, finally got hold of him and started working with him. And my point was a very simple point. What you're saying about cars, if you are correct, I said to Nader, what you are saying about cars can be said about any of the primary marketplace industries in our country. It could be food, it could be cars, it could be drugs, it could be housing, it could be anything. They are all organized in a very specific way, and they create a particular outcome. And that outcome tends to be raising the price, lowering the quality, and increasing the level of risk. And that's intrinsic in a concept which says the most important thing in our system is how much money we can make. The more money we can make, that's the best value, that's the best reward we can get, telling us we're doing the right thing. And it's a very simple human error, which is systematized into our system. And the error, it goes like this. Everybody would agree with free market capitalism's idea that if you build a better mousetrap, the people will beat a path to your door. I've never run into anybody who argues that that's not true. However, that got shifted over the years in our system to say, if 1 million people are beating a path to your door, it's obvious you've built a better mousetrap. And that's a fallacy. It's just not true. Because you can get people to beat a path to your door in 1,000 ways that have nothing to do with whether you've got a good mousetrap or not. And our system has become past masters at that. It's an administered state and administrative priced economy. It's a state-regulated monopoly system, and it's problematic. And so what I did was say we need to bring the consumers into this situation. And then I signed up with Nader in '68. That's before he was still a loner at that point. I say I was the first Nader's Raider. He says I was one of the first. That's, I think, kind of cute. But I signed up in March of '68, and between March and June of that year, a bunch of other folks signed up, and we ended up being the first Nader Raiders. There were 9 of them. And then the next year, there were many, many, many more. And in that period, from '68 to '71, when I worked worked closely with Nader, we got calls from all kinds of people that had issues that they said, would you look into this? And one of them came to me from the former Secretary of Health and Human Services, John Gardner. And he had been Johnson, he was a Republican, but he had been Johnson's Secretary of which was called at that time Health, Education, and Welfare, and then it was changed to Health and Human Services. And he called me and said, I have been trying to get vaccines to be looked at by investigative reporters or scientists or somebody in Washington, because when I was secretary, something was going wrong with vaccines that I didn't know about, and I'd like somebody to look at it, and I can't find anybody. Would you, over there at Nader's place, would you guys be willing to look at it? And I said, well, yeah, I'm sure. So I got together with him, and we laid out a plan, and I started working on it. And I actually was very, very involved in it from 1970 to 1980 as one of the issues I worked on. And what I discovered was that it was a horrible mess. The whole vaccine situation was just a mess. And we worked very diligently. We got vaccine regulation moved from NIH to FDA. We got rulings from the Justice Department, and we got Senate hearings that said that the NIH was improperly ignoring the Food and Drug Law as a way of regulating vaccines, and the whole thing got moved over. Then very shortly thereafter came the so-called 1976 swine flu debacle. And we were very much involved in that. There's lots of stories to tell about this, but we really worked hard to get people to look at what was going on. And we weren't the only ones. We got other people to look at it, and other people looked at it on their own and discovered the flu vaccine that they were using was carrying a significant side effect that was affecting a significant number of people. The end result of that was that that program was canceled. They had set out to inoculate 200 million Americans, and they were able to inoculate 49 million, roughly. And then they stopped. And so that was 49 for inoculation, 151 for choice not to inoculate. A lot of reasoning went into why that program should not have been launched and why it was canceled. I had thought we would set off a discussion about vaccines and virology and so forth, but rather what occurred at that point is that was in 76. About 79, between 79 and 81, a new event started to occur, which came to be known as AIDS. And it was a very unique insult into the American healthcare world. And that began to be addressed primarily, almost solely, as a viral disease. And there were lots of debates and fighting and so forth, but it was a viral disease. And this pushed the concept of vaccines back into the mainstream thinking of health policy, and since then, Dr. Fauci was a key player at that point. From that time to the present, there's been an effort to create an AIDS vaccine, and it's not been successful. They have not been able to find an AIDS vaccine. All that I'm telling you, and there's a lot more detail about that, all that I'm telling you underpins what we're doing with the COVID vaccine. And it's a significant problem intellectually. It's a significant problem because vaccines are a part of an overall approach to an infectious disease. When smallpox was eliminated from the world, essentially, the very, very famous doctor who did that, took him many years, almost 3 decades, but they used vaccines very selectively. Very selectively. The smallpox vaccine was used in very targeted ways around groups of people where the smallpox was identified as being active. And they used it to build a wall between that community and the uninfected community so that the uninfected community could use its own natural capacities to build up resistance or whatever to smallpox. And that strategy, used over 20 or 30 years, was able to cleanse smallpox out of the world health problem. And that's a very important part to understand about the fact that vaccines have a role to play to some extent, perhaps. I mean, there's a whole debate now as to whether the way we've industrialized vaccines over the last 50 years or so has actually diminished their capacity to be effective. When I started this, the former Secretary Gardner introduced me to an FDA official. It wasn't an FDA official at the time, it was an NIH official, it became an FDA official, Dr. Tony Morris, and I spent many, many hours over the next decade with him. One of the very early things he told me was that when you look at these vaccines and viral problems, the DNA is more important than the RNA is more important than the DNA. He told me that. I don't know. I'm a lawyer. I'm not a scientist. But he said that mediates more how these things are communicated than the DNA does. He also said that common cold probably would never have a vaccine made for it because it's too volatile. It changes too rapidly. Changes very, very rapidly, and there are thousands of different ways or dozens of different ways that colds get transmitted, and to try to address that with the vaccine was never really going to happen. And one of the problems about the so-called novel COVID-19 virus is whether it's closer to a flu-type event or a common cold-type event. And that's not very well understood as far as I can see in the stuff I'm reading. And I'm noticing that there is a bunch of debates going on between immunologists and virologists on one side and other scientists who are doctors, research, and so forth on the other side. And there's a great deal of discussion about how to handle the notion of a vaccine in the COVID world. And so, you know, and I hope you do more research and bring up more questions, because this is something the whole society is going to have to deal with. And it's getting very touch and go because two events. One is they're moving in the direction of the COVID virus vaccine. COVID-19 vaccine, and there's going to be a big question about whether you should take it or not and whether it should be made mandatory or not. It's going to be trouble, very big trouble. The second thing that's happened just the night before Thanksgiving is that the Supreme Court ruled that the lockdowns that were going on in New York State were lockdowns that affected churches, and they were Catholic. The court talked about churches, synagogues, and mosques, and all of them were being closed down in the areas that were designated as yellow and orange by the governor. Now, I'm sort of just lecturing in a way here, but these are important ideas to understand. I'm reading the mainstream media about the argument that's being made here, and they say the conservatives now have a 5-3 majority on the court, with the Chief Justice being a swing vote, so to speak. So they now got a 5-4 decision saying Governor Cuomo's rules exceeded his authority under the Constitution. Now, the way the public media is playing that is the mainstream media is playing that, is a liberal-conservative split. But they're saying the conservatives represented the religious side and the liberals represented the science side. That's the way the media is doing. That isn't even what the issue was in the case. The issue in the case was a very, very specific practical issue. And that was that the night before the court was going to issue its, maybe a day before, 2 days before, the court issued its opinion. The governor's office amended their order and excluded the mosques, churches, and temples from the restrictions. And the question the court voted 5-4 on was the question, should we vote at this time or not? So conservatives said we should vote now and not force the people and the churches to come back when the governor reimposes these rules. We should vote now. And the liberals said, no, we should wait until the governor reimposes. That's a completely separate issue than anything about the substance. So it's interesting to me to read the case because the opinion that it was actually not a case in which opinions were necessary. It was an unsigned opinion, an unsigned ruling, but there were some opinions written. And the one of them that was the lead opinion was Gorsuch. And Gorsuch created a situation in which he took on the fundamental vaccine case decided by the Supreme Court in 1906 and basically said it is not controlling for the way we manage vaccines going forward. He basically said that case did not address any of the fundamental issues on vaccines. This is a huge shift in the policy of the court, and it's very difficult for me to see how that idea, the notion that we need to revisit or the notion that we need to create rules or legal rules for the use of vaccines in the 21st century that are broader and more subtle and more sensitive than the rules created at the beginning of the 20th century in 1906. I don't understand myself personally how that gets to be an argument between liberals and conservatives, or certainly at this point, or religious people and science people. That does not seem to me to be what this is about. But that's the way that's the way it's being played by the media. It's very important to be really clear that the media gives us a pointer. It says, go look. If you want to know something, go look. Here's an important thing that was done in terms of our competitive, legal, political process. It's a 5-4